Oi, oi, all right, how's it going? I'm Grant, you're you. This is the Doodle Review coming through with a new album to give a spin, chat some fraff about, and assign a completely arbitrary and pointless score to. Today we're talking about the latest Shellac album, To All Trains, and this was an album I was really excited to hear was coming out. It's been a full decade now since the previous Shellac record, Dude Incredible, was released in 2014, and I was into it at the time. But more recently, I found myself diving more and more into and loving the whole kind of noise rock and post-hardcore canon. I got turned on to At Action Park during my recent conversation with Predeceased a couple of months back, and it all just felt like the perfect time for a fresh album from this band that I've kind of grown a real interest in. That excitement turned to sadness on the 7th of May, though, when reports came through that the band's enigmatic frontman, though he'd probably bulk at that phrase, that the band's leader, again, probably would inspire an eye roll. Okay, so on May 7th, reports came through that one of the three members of Shellac, the one that happened to play guitar and deliver vocals, Steve Albini, passed away. Now, for anyone that has never heard of Shellac or heard of Steve Albini, that pedantic explanation of his passing will make absolutely no sense. And to those people, I say, please go and read up about this man, whether you ultimately like Shellac or you like this album. If you're into underground alternative music, Albini will have made an impact on some part of it that you know and appreciate. And Albini's influence on alternative and underground music was seismic, not least because he made that impact in multiple ways. Firstly, as the leader of fierce and revered bands like Big Black and Shellac. As an engineer, he hated the term producer, for literally hundreds of artists like Pixies and Nirvana, helping them carve iconic sounding records. And finally, as a commentator on music and culture at large. And I want to hone in on that last one for a second, and I promise we will actually talk about To All Trains in this video, but I hope fans appreciate that to attempt to review this record while glazing over the importance of Albini would be about as offensive as the man himself. So, as a commentator, Steve Albini could be as caustic as the often very venomous delivery of his lyrics as a vocalist. He was an uncompromising critic of the capitalistic machine of the music industry, and he published a number of essays and delivered keynote addresses that continue to be pored over and referenced by journalists many years after the fact. His first essay on the topic came out way back in 1993, publishing The Problem with Music in American magazine The Baffler. Within the top two lines, his opening gambit, he announces what he thinks of when forced to describe a label contract, and I quote, "I imagine a trench about 4 feet wide and 5 feet deep, maybe 60 yards long, filled with runny, decaying shit." Obviously, the antagonistic language turned heads, created some shock value, and made for an entertaining read. But the reason it's remembered is because across the following few thousand words, Albini offers a complete breakdown with costs and receipts of the unjust nature of contracts at the heart of the business in an uncompromising and unflinching way. He didn't just intellectualize his issues with the industry, though. He kind of established his own code of ethics that governed how he would then operate within that institution. Most famously, as an engineer, he just point blank refused to take royalty points on any of the records he worked on. Just a one-time upfront fee for his services, likening himself to a plumber. His rationale being that you don't have to pay them every time your toilet flushes, right? So why should what he does be any different? And I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of the spirit of his thought process. Adding to his legacy as a thinker in his later years was his quite public, open and vulnerable self-reflection and ultimate renouncement of his younger, more hateful writings. Edgelord wasn't really a phrase when Albini was at his most provoking and shocking, but it's a label that absolutely fits the bill. He was known for spinning the darkest yarns in his lyrics and flagrantly using racist, homophobic and misogynistic phrases. I mean, one of his bands was literally called Rape Man. But anyone that knew Albini personally seemed to attest to the fact that he was far from a bigot, and instead he was just a contrarian to the millionth degree, using extreme language to protest the anodyne, sterilised and whitewashed culture at large. A few years ago, he came to acknowledge that while he felt comfortable dabbling in that shocking edgelord language because he saw the actual concepts of misogyny, homophobia and racism as just truly ridiculous. He had been overlooking his own privilege in all of that. And the essay he went on to write about the whole thing, I think, is one of the best summaries and deconstructions of the dangers of propagating harmful rhetoric under a shield of irony. And I'd urge anyone to read that stuff if you've ever yourself kind of dabbled in that, oh, I'm just using it ironically sort of thing. So with all that said, rest in peace, Mr. Steve Albini. You were flawed, but smart, well-meaning, principled, and probably one of the fiercest punks there ever was. That brings us finally to All Trains. Ostensibly, the final Shellac album, though there could well be some posthumous releases in the future, which as a fan I'd be more than happy to hear, but I can kind of imagine the man himself having some sort of opinion on that. Ultimately, the new Shellac record sounds perfectly like what a Shellac record should and does sound like. The sound of a Shellac record to me is so pure. The only vision I have in my head when I put on a record, whether it's Action Park, 1000 Hertz or Dude Incredible, I just think of Albini, bassist Bob Weston and drummer Todd Traynor wired up and playing live in the studio. The sound captured is so raw, so direct, it's less like listening to a laboured record and more like listening to a live set with just the absolute perfect mix. Over the 30 years from 1994 to now, in 2024, each record has got a touch drier. The reverb gets marginally lower with every new album, but overall the sound is mechanically consistent. It's like Shellac is less of a band and more of a room, and we last walked into this room in 2014 and they hit us with Dude Incredible. And we walked back into this room in 2024 and here they are, all perfectly in place, barely moves, ready to hit you with To All Trains. You could put those two records on back to back, as I have during my process for writing this review, and notice almost no discernible difference in the sonic texture from one to the other. The only dead giveaway would be the runtime. Italian Greyhound aside, clocking in at 40 minutes, which is absolute prog rock madness from the trio there. But aside from that, every record sits at a perfect 30-ish minutes. Almost every song on To All Trains is led by Albini's trademark wiry guitar tone, which is achieved through a combination of the Travis Bean guitar, special because its guitar neck is machined of aluminium, which gives every note a natural sound like when you rub two serrated metal edges together. And it's that natural serrated timbre of the guitar tone driven through a harmonic percolator distortion pedal, which I'll be honest, I watched a whole video of Albini talking through that pedal and why it sounds the way it does, and I still don't really understand why it does that, but it is the combo of those two things that make the trademark Shellac guitar tone. And the first track, WSOD, puts that tone to good use instantly, starting things off with a suitably spidery guitar riff that's punctuated by these tight as hell bass and drum hits before dropping into a really great groove. It's the climax that's the best part though, one of the few times that another distortion is layered on top of the guitar, which elevates the closing moments of the track with a massive fuzzed out freak out that goes hard and you just wish it would last forever. True to type, the band just don't dare overindulge here though, and it's over in about 20 seconds and we're into the next track. We've allocated obviously a lot of time to Albini in this review, which of course we would, but he is only 1/3 of Shellac, and what gives this band its monolithic sound is equal parts down to the rhythm section of Bob Weston and Todd Traynor. Weston's bass in particular is the glue that binds those wiry, spidery, sinister guitar riffs to the gut-punching drums and kind of holds it all together. And I love the grittiness that the bass provides on tracks like Tattoos. It just adds the perfect amount of weight to those drums while the guitar kind of dances around it. On Days of Dogs, one of the upbeat tunes here, the bass is bending in between each of the chords, providing this kind of low-level threat under the surface, mostly meandering, but every now and again kind of leaning into action and syncopating with the drums. And on that same track, Traynor's drums do this really cool thing in the final minute where they get to follow the notes of the guitar riff, punctuating every touch point of that twisted scale with a tom or a snare hit. And it's often those subtle progressions introduced by the players kind of under the surface that get me most excited, whether it's the drum parts I just talked about, or how on Girl From Outside, where Weston's bass manages to kind of crawl out from under the riff and launch into these different scales. But it happens only sporadically. Wednesday is another track where Trainer's drums make the whole piece for me. It starts with these very impressionistic rolls and spasms of activity, and then as the track goes on, there's just this pensive way in which he holds back some of the rolls that add even more tension to the overall really spooky vibe of the song. And I love how Trainer just beds down in that groove on the second half of a banger like Scabby the Rat. Some of my favourite feels where he sounds like he's just going off piste are on Chick New Wave as well. The whole album is a representation of the amazing power trio that is Shellac. It's sadly always going to have the label as the last album before Albini's passing, but had that not happened, it would remain a banger. The album ends with Albini stating, "If there's a hell, I'm going to know everyone." And if such a place exists, I hope he doesn't make it there, mainly because the chaos he'd cause in the other place would just be much more interesting. I'm going to give this one an 8.5 and knock it on the head. That's just what I think though. What are you lot saying? Let me know in the comments. Is this your favourite Shellac album? What do you think about the passing of Steve Albini? Check out in the description below lots of related reviews, and if you can be asked to do all that, well, you may as well subscribe, stick around, share some thoughts, show some love, or just have some abuse in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers mate, take care, mind how you go, bye.